Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I'm Dr. Sarah Abosh Jacobson. I'm the Barbara Rabin Chief Education Officer here at the museum, and you are in for a real treat today. This is the third in our five-part Spring Break 2024 speaker series. Today you will hear from Hanna Schrob, who will share her family's story of survival in the Westerbork Transit Camp, among others, and also her story about liberation by the U.S. Army in France. Before we begin, I would like to thank our community partners for the Spring Break Survivor Series, the Dallas Mavericks, the Legacy Senior Communities, and I know that there's a bunch of you here, SMU Human Rights Program, Southwest Jewish Congress. We are grateful for your support of the museum and our programs. I would also like to extend a special welcome to our board members, and volunteers in the audience. We couldn't fulfill our mission without you. If you're interested in becoming a museum member or a volunteer, please visit our website at dhhrm.org to learn more. You can also, on your way out of the theater, talk to the women sitting at the desk there, or talk to the women and young man at our front desk, because they can help you as well. In just a moment, Hanna will share her story with you. Then we will have time for questions and answers. If you're joining us in person today, you should have an index card and a little golf pencil that you were handed upon entry into the theater. Please write down any questions that you would like to ask Ms. Schrob on that card while she's speaking, and we will have staff come around to collect those from you at the end of her talk today, so she can answer those. If you are joining us virtually, so via Zoom, please use the Q&A function that's at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions, and we will weave those into the question and answer period as well. I would also ask you at this point to please silence your phones. You don't have to turn them off, but please do put them on vibrate, because it gets very distracting for Hanna and for your fellow listeners. We are recording Hanna's talk, and it will be on the museum's YouTube channel, so you can watch that again if you would like. So we ask that you do not record any of this talk, because an official recording is being made. And it is now my great pleasure, and that is a phone. Please turn it off. Thank you. It is now my pleasure to turn things over to Hanna.
Thank you, Sarah. Shalom and welcome, everyone, and thank you for allowing me to tell my story. I am one of the lucky ones. My immediate family of 6 survived the war. I was not quite 7 years old when the Gestapo, which was the German police, knocked on our door and removed us from our home. My name is Hanna Laurie Spielman. I was born in Maastricht, Holland, on July 5th, 1936. My parents were Helen and Alexander Spielman. I had 3 siblings. Bernard was the oldest and was born in Essen, Germany. Nathan, myself, and Edith were born in Maastricht. My mother was born in New York City to German immigrants. When she was 3 years old, her parents decided to return to Europe because they could no longer adjust to the living in America. All my life, I believed my father, Alexander, was born in Austria, but I recently learned he might have been born in Poland on September 15, 1905. He was an optician and founded the International Optical Syndicate. My father was on a business trip to Essen, Germany, when he met my mother. She was working at that time at her uncle's shirt factory as a seamstress when she was introduced to my father, and they quickly fell in love. They were married in 1932. My mother gave birth to her first child, Bernard, shortly after that. This was the same time that Hitler started to gain power in Germany. Hitler became Chancellor of Germany in 1933, just a year after my parents were married. Life became very difficult for Jewish people in Germany. Jewish businesses were closed, banks were closed, children no longer could go to school, and all the professionals were no longer allowed to practice in their field. Along with my aunt and uncle, my parents saw the danger and moved across the German border to Maastricht, Holland, where they believed they would be safe. As you can see, there are some family pictures. That's me with long pigtails. The picture with my mother and my two siblings, my mother made all those outfits. My father is standing there with me and my brother Nathan and my mother. And on the top picture there, that's my mother's family. Here in Maastricht, I and two more siblings were born. Because of the change in American citizenship, laws at that time, Nathan and I were granted American citizenship at birth because of my mother's citizenship. This law existed for 6 years on the American books. So my oldest brother and my youngest sister were not born under that law, so when we came to this country, they had to be naturalized. Our life in Maastricht was very normal and very happy. My father had a very successful eyeglass import business, and we lived in a beautiful home. In 1940, Hitler conquered Holland. We no longer were allowed to have telephones, cars, or be outdoors with the Jewish star that you see on the screen that had to be sewn to our clothing. My mother was the one who sewed all these on our clothing. Children could no longer attend school, and life became very restricted. The only way to continue the education of Jewish children was privately by Jewish teachers. During an air raid, with bombs and sirens in the background, my mother went into labor to give birth to her fourth child. At the hospital, nurses and doctors were frantically getting other patients down into the basement, leaving my mother all alone to deliver her baby girl. Then, as danger continued to loom throughout Europe, my aunts and uncles were able to sail to the United States. Before departing, they tried to convince my parents to leave with them. At that time, my father was a disbeliever who did not think Hitler would come into Holland. But things got dramatically worse, and so my parents decided to try and flee Europe in late 1942. My family packed our belongings into boxes and readied them to board on a ship destined for America. But we were not able to travel because documents or visas for my father and older brother and younger sister were not American, because they were not American citizens. Unfortunately, by the time we tried to leave, the last ship departed before we could leave the port of Holland. During this time, people all over Europe would take great risks to help Jewish people in whatever way they could for food, shelter, and information, and continuing education for Jewish children. However, there were many people who could not be trusted, who would turn in Jews if given a chance because they were afraid and hoped to benefit from the Nazis. A generous neighbor offered to store valuables that our family had crated for our departure. During the night, these crates were transported over the roofs of the houses. They were row houses, so that nobody could see what they were doing. Because these neighbors were Gentiles or non-Jews, they had no reason to believe that they could help, but promised my parents they could recover these belongings after the war if they survived. If it not for these courageous people, we would not have been able to retain all of our very valuable possessions. 6 weeks after the birth of my sister, the Nazis knocked on our door and took us away. We found out that the town's mayor had denounced my family to the Germans. Denouncing meant that the Maastricht mayor told the Nazis my family were Jews. Off to a living hell went 2 adults, 3 children, an infant, and just a few suitcases. We were forced to quickly decide what we would pack in the few suitcases that were allowed: diapers, clothing, and items of survival. The Nazis pushed us onto a truck, and we were taken to a jail where we slept on hay on the floor. My mother stayed up all night beating off all the rats that were running around the jail cell. After a few days in jail, we were transported to Westerbork, and you can see that on the screen. We were faced with possible extermination. The purpose of Westerbork Transit Camp was to temporarily hold Jews awaiting for deportation to any of the death camps in the East. Each time we were scheduled for transport to the death camp, the trains were so full that we could not board. In Westerbork, conditions were substandard for adults and worse for an infant. Food was scarce, and as a result, my mother no longer could nurse the baby, making her survival even more questionable. We were housed in barracks, and I remember having to sleep on my sister's diapers just so we could dry them out. And then things got dramatically worse when, after 6 months in Westerbork, my father was separated from us. All our family, except him, were transported to Liebenau, an internment camp in Germany, because of my mother's citizenship. This camp held those in Europe with foreign citizenship like American, French, and British. As we left my father behind, my mother's last words were, "We will never see him again." From Liebenau, we were taken to Vittel, an internment camp in France. Vittel was in the mountains and was a spa town before the war. After the fall of France in 1940, the Nazis used it as a collection point for foreign nationals, including British and North and South Americans, as well as Jews holding sealed foreign passports. Officials in the Gestapo sought throughout the war to use these prisoners in exchange for German nationals held by Allied nations. However, in April 1944, as the war turned against Germany, orders were issued to arrest and deport stateless Jews and those holding papers from countries occupied by Germany. Jews holding papers from belligerent countries were also to be arrested and interned in France. On April 9th, 1944, 137 Jews in Vittel were assembled and transported to Drancy, a transit camp with a similar purpose like Westerbork, and then to Auschwitz, where they were all murdered. Vittel was liberated on September 9th, 1944. One of my most terrifying memories of Vittel involves a baby carriage someone had given my mother. It was an old, beat-up carriage. One day she suggested that I take the baby for a walk. While on our walk, there was an air raid. Planes were flying and bombs were exploding all around me. I was on a rubble-covered road rushing to get back to my mother when the carriage tipped over and Edie rolled out. I scooped her up into my arms, and as fast as I could, I turned the carriage and pulled it all the way back. With just a second to spare, we reached the door where they pulled us in and then locked the doors. I still can see the whole thing as if it happened yesterday. After almost 2 years of not seeing my father, I witnessed a miracle. At the end of a long line of people emerging from transport to Vittel, I stared in disbelief as my father appeared at the end of the line, helping a wounded man. When my mother spotted him, she just literally passed out. It was a beautiful sight when the American jeeps and tanks started rolling in to liberate the camp. I remember an American soldier who came over the fence and gave me some carrots and my first piece of American white bread. And my first thought was, I have to go on to my mother and to show her what this soldier gave me. And I said, look what I have for Edie, because it was more important for her to have the nourishment than I for myself. When the Americans were liberating us, a soldier from General Patton's Third Army, Eldon Nicholas of Cadillac, Michigan, and you can see him there on the left. Took it upon himself to entertain children at the fence with a toy monkey puppet. This is a picture of him and his puppet that he used to entertain us. I am going to play this video that was captured by the humanitarian organization that includes the puppet show and my family. That's my baby sister right there. My mother is holding her at the fence. And that's my mom and my sister. And there on the left is me. I guess that's it. This film was shown to my sister and me in Florida by the Museum of Miami. A representative had come to our home to interview us, and she brought this video. We had no idea what we were going to see, and when she put it on the computer and started playing this video, my sister stood up and just screamed, and she's, "Oh my gosh, that's me on that video." We were just shocked to be able to see ourselves in that setting. From Vitel, the Americans sent us to La Bourboule in France, placed us in a hotel, deloused us, and oriented us to life as free people. My mother's American citizenship was instrumental in getting us passage on the Thomas H. Barry battleship for our new lives in America. I thought there was a picture of that. During the boat trip to America, I got to meet with wounded soldiers returning home. This was a very special time for all of us because we children were allowed to go into the hospital area where they were, and we were allowed to sit on their beds, and they told us stories and sang songs to us. And it was just amazing that these poor guys with limbs missing and bodies that were just broken apart always had a smile on their face. It was just wonderful to see that. Upon arrival in Boston, we were greeted with donuts and hot chocolate by the Red Cross. The donuts, were so good that to this day I'm still very fond of it, and as you can see, it shows. We then boarded a train to New York City, where we had a very emotional reunion with my mother's family. It was December 24th, 1944, and the city was bright with holiday lights. We had heard stories that America was paved in gold, but this was more spectacular than anything we had imagined. If you just can imagine these poor people riding down Fifth Avenue, and all these lights were just amazing. At first, our family was separated to live with different relatives. Later, we were reunited in our home in Orange, New Jersey, where we had some difficult adjustments to make. Now we had to learn English. None of us spoke English. And the first thing my father did was sit us around the kitchen table. And he said, "We are now living in the USA, and they speak English here, and I don't want to hear anything else spoken in this house." And we were all fluent within 6 months. Although things were normal as I grew up, I realized that the war had its impact on my father. He had been very successful in Europe, but the business he had before the war did not fare well for him in the United States. It was a struggle, but somehow we managed, and we grew up. Just a little story for you. One of my parents' biggest concerns was my baby sister. She was so malnourished that her survival was unclear. My parents took her to several doctors, and one of them recommended they feed her bacon. Even though my parents were Orthodox Jews, which forbid the consumption of pork, they bought a plate, fork, knife, and a pan just to make her bacon. They wouldn't let me have it, even though it smelled so good. She responded well and is still alive, doing well today. I don't know what the bacon did for her, but it sure helped. After high school, I met and married Herb Schrob, and that was the beginning of a very exciting life for me. He showed me the world, and that helped me to develop the self-esteem that I never had. We were blessed with 4 beautiful children, Michelle, Amy, David, and Alan. On our 10th anniversary, we had an opportunity to move overseas with 3 children to Breda, Holland, where Herb was going to oversee the construction of a new plastic factory being built for his boss, Joe Foster of Foster Grant. It was ironic that after 25 years, I am back in Holland. Who would have thought? During our stay, we discovered that there were 100 Jewish people that had remained in Breda after the war. Since the synagogue had been destroyed during the war, they had no place to gather or to worship and were trying to reestablish their temple. Unfortunately, the Dutch government could not subsidize or help them pay for this project. On one of my visits back to the US, Herb and I met with a rabbi to see if there were any foundations that might help to rebuild the temple that was lost. Unfortunately, nothing developed from that. When Herb's boss, Joe Foster, learned what we were trying to do, he called Herb into his office and said, "What's this thing that you and Hanna are trying to do in Breda?" We told him about the synagogue that they would like to build, and he turned to Herb and said, "When you go back to Holland, you tell them that they will have a new synagogue," and he paid for the whole thing. This was one of the highlights of our life together. It meant so much to us to help give those Dutch Jews a place to pray and keep their Jewish community together. Fortunately, we were able to attend the dedication of Beth Foster Temple. All the dignitaries, and you can see that on the left, and my husband is holding a Torah, and he's on the right with the glasses. All the dignitaries of the city were there to welcome the new Jewish community. I could go on and on, telling you many more stories, but time is limited, so I will close. Thank you all for allowing me to share my story today. I have lived a very full and exciting life. I have traveled to many countries and came to the realization that America is the best country in the world, and I am so proud to be an American. But things have truly changed. Over the years, I have experienced anti-Semitism, but not to the extent that is happening here in America today. It is so sad that we have to fear going to the synagogue to worship and to endure hatred and violence all over again. All of us here are the future of this country, and it will be up to us to make sure that all peoples are able to live in freedom and enjoy the beautiful country that we live in. Let us all do away with anti-Semitism and hatred that now exists in our country. May God bless you and the USA. Thank you. I also want to thank the Dallas Holocaust Museum for keeping alive what happened during World War II and the Jewish people. It is so important to make people aware and to prevent history from repeating itself. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
So there was something that Hannah just said in her before she closed that I wanted to share with you, because I'd never heard the name of the synagogue before in Braden. It was called Beit or Beth Foster. So Beit in Hebrew means house. So you have synagogues that are, Beit Torah, House of Torah, or Beit Shemesh, House of Sun, but this was House of Foster. So they took Foster Grant's name and stuck the Hebrew in front of it. I think that's awesome. Okay, so we have some questions that came in from online, and we have some staff and volunteers who are circulating. So if you have a question, just hold your card up and they will come around. Marcia, they'll come down and grab those from you. Okay, thank you. So the first question from somebody in the Zoom audience is, Hannah, when did you begin sharing your story, and why did you start sharing your story?
That's a very good question. My family, including myself, never spoke about what happened to us until I moved to Norfolk, Virginia. Actually, it was Virginia Beach. And the Holocaust Society in Norfolk had learned that I was a survivor and invited me to be present at a meeting that they were holding. And at that time, they were training some of the Holocaust survivors to do talks in schools. At that time, I decided it's time that I need to speak out as well. And so that's when I officially started speaking in schools. I think at that point, the museum, or the Holocaust Society, also published a book called Life. And they interviewed all the Holocaust survivors in the area and made a book out of it, and my story's in that book. And I had never spoken to my own family about this. So one Thanksgiving, we were all in Plano, Texas. There were 14 of us at Thanksgiving dinner at my son's house. And after the meal, I asked if they wouldn't mind if I read this story. And they all sat very quietly, and I read the book, the story out of the book. And before I knew it, my granddaughter came jumping up, running over to me and hugged me, and she said, "Grandma, I had no idea what you went through." That was the beginning of speaking to my family and letting them know my history.
Thank you. Did your parents talk about their experiences during the war with you later in life?
Absolutely not.
Any idea why not?
They just wanted to forget it, I guess, or it was just too painful for them to speak about it. So it was never mentioned.
Okay, all right. And that's not
not
atypical at
unusual
all.
either.
Yeah. Hannah, how did your experiences shape your Jewish faith?
That's a good question. I think it made it much stronger. I came from an Orthodox family, and I was taught and went to Hebrew school, and my faith was strong throughout my life.
Okay. It says you're one of several local survivors who endured the war as a child. How do you think experiencing the war at such a young age may have affected your outlook on life?
You grow up very, very fast if you are going through something like the war. It made me appreciate my life more once I got into the States. it's just a wonderful country, and to be able to be free was just amazing to us.
Following up on that, we have some high school students in the audience today. What advice would you give them as they begin to navigate into adulthood? Because you had to do it across cultures and languages and a whole series of other things.
I would say stay involved, keep up with the news, fight against not only anti-Semitism, but against the blacks, against the any people that have been discriminated against. Work to stop that hatred. I can't stress that more than anything.
When did you move to Dallas, and what do you like living about here?
I moved here 3 years ago. I was living in Florida during the pandemic and became very depressed because I was cooped up in my home all by myself for over a year. And I was telling my son how I felt, that I just didn't feel like I was alive anymore. And he became very concerned. And the next day he called me and he says, "Mom, I think you need a change." And he found a very wonderful place for me to move to here in Dallas, and that's the Legacy at Midtown Park. And it has been a wonderful move, and also it gave me a chance to be close to my son and daughter-in-law and my 2 grandchildren and my great-grandchildren. I have 4 of those. What could be better than to be living in Dallas?
Did all of your family come to the U.S. with you, or did any of them stay in Europe when you came?
No, we all came. But I did lose my aunt who lived with us in Europe. She was taken about 6 weeks prior to us being taken, and she went directly to Auschwitz, and of course we never heard from her again. She was the only one that I know of that was did not make it.
Do you still speak other languages?
Yes.
Which ones?
Well, I was speaking Dutch, but you know, they say when you don't use it, you lose it, and I'm losing it. I also studied French, I studied Spanish, all of which I don't remember very much of. Also, I understand Yiddish and German.
Okay, all right. Where was your father during the 2 years that he was absent from the family?
He was in Westerbork.
So he was in Westerbork the entire time. And what did he do there? Because Westerbork, frequently people are brought in and then taken out almost immediately. So can you tell them about that?
We don't know.
Oh, okay.
He never spoke about it.
Okay. Hannah, did you get to see your childhood home and community when you visited Holland? And was it the same as you remembered it, or was it completely different?
Good question. There was one day my husband said, "Why don't we just get in the car and go to Maastricht and see if we can't find the street that you lived on?" And that's exactly what we did. On the way there, I described to my husband exactly how I remembered my childhood house in detail. And so when we got to the street, we found the house and we knocked on the door, and this woman answered, and I told her who I was, and she says, "Oh, I think I remember your parents." And she was so nice, she invited us in, and we had a cup of coffee, and we talked for a while. And then she said, "How would you like to tour the house?" And she let us wander through the house up 3 flights. And when we got back in the car, my husband sat there and just looked at me, and he says, I cannot believe how you remembered that house so clearly. Every room I was able to describe to him. Some of the incidents that occurred to me in some of these rooms. So it was a nice way to me see my home again.
It's also quite a memory.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What do you remember about the 6 months you and your siblings spent learning English and speaking it in your household? Was it more difficult for you and your siblings, or more difficult for your parents to adapt?
My siblings and I, we adapted very easily. I was placed in kindergarten at the age of 9, and I spent about a month in kindergarten, and then they put me in first grade, and then after a month they saw that I was catching on, so they kept promoting me until I was in the right grade. For my parents, it was probably a little more difficult, even though they did speak full language, the English. But just adjusting to this new life was very difficult for them.
All right. Was your family able to take any possessions with you to the U.S., or did you arrive just with the clothes on your back?
Just the clothes on our backs. And I don't remember just how long afterwards that my father took passage on the Queen Mary and went back to Holland and knocked on the door of our neighbors and said, I made it. And they had all those boxes sitting there waiting for him to return.
Wow.
And they shipped everything back to the States, so we were able to have a lot of our valuables.
That's really unusual.
Yes, it was
amazing.
Very unusual.
Yeah, okay. Next question. What would you most like people to take away from your story?
Those of you here who have toured the museum, you know what went on during the war. And I'm here to tell you a personal story so that it makes it even more real to you. I don't know what I could say for them to take away except appreciate what you have and hold on to it dearly. Don't let anybody ever take this away from you.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you all so much for joining us. If you're planning on visiting the rest of the museum, please stop by the front desk and get your tickets and check in with them. I'd also like to invite you to tune in for our remaining spring break survivors this week. Tomorrow will be Andres Lacko, who will talk about surviving the Holocaust in Hungary as a boy. And then Friday will be Maggie First, who will talk about surviving Germany and Kristallnacht and coming on the Kindertransport to England and ultimately to the United States. And I am going to ask, pretty please, if any of you would like to meet Ms. Schrob. She will be up here for a few minutes, and you are welcome to come up and talk with her. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.